Okay, so this is the third video following up on the statistics video. I'm going to go ahead and just go right into this last. And this last video is essentially my overall thoughts about the CDT and I guess how I'm feeling about it and how I felt about it at the time. And now it's been 3 months, all that kind of fun stuff. So I thought a lot about my through hikes. I hiked the Colorado Trail in 2009. I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail in 2013, and then I hiked the CDT, the Continental Divide Trail in 2022. And I'm fairly certain that there's only one piece of gear that made it every single day. Even though I almost lost it once on the PCT and once on the CDT, this piece of gear actually was wonderful, and it was my knife. That's the only thing that made it every single day on all three of my through hikes. Not my tent, not my sleeping bags, not my sleeping pads, not my cookware, not my pack, no clothes, shoes, of course. I take it back. There was one other piece of gear that's been with me every single day on the PCT and the CDT. I think I had it on the Colorado Trail. I'd have to go back and look at photos. That was my Nalgene. So this was an old school Nalgene, like back in the early 2000s. I purchased it. It was one of those soft. It's white with a blue. It's like the original Nalgene. It's white with a blue lid, and it's soft. It's not one of those hard-sided Nalgenes. So I'd have to go back to look on the Colorado Trail, but I know that it was with me every day on the PCT and the CDT. But I know for certain that this knife was with me for all three hikes, every single day of all three hikes. It's a Gerber mini paraframe, I think is what it's called. It has a serrated blade. Half of the blade is serrated, and many people have asked like why I carry this knife, but it's light because some of the handle is missing in quotes, and the knife is not very long. It's also got gunk on it. Like the blade is essentially, my pointer finger. It's a light knife, it's a durable knife, and it's great. It's never caused me any issues. So thinking back on the reason why I bring it up, I was thinking back on my hikes, and I realized through hiking is difficult. Like, it's rough on your gear, it's rough on yourself, and the fact that out of all those hikes, only one piece of gear has been with me for all three hikes. And granted, the hikes are spanning from 2009 to 2022, so 13 to 14 years. I get that point, but to only have one piece of gear make it through all three hikes just tells you how rough we are on the gear on those hikes. Not intentionally, just because you're using the gear day after day. When you're on trail, like I was on trail for the CDT for essentially 5 months. I think it was like 2 days. It might have been 2 days shy of 5 months. The PCT was 4.5 months. The Colorado Trail was a month, a little over a month. When you're using gear day in and day out, it's gonna wear down. And that includes your tents, your sleeping bag, your sleeping pads, your pack itself, your cooking equipment, if you bring it, your water filtration, even storage sacks, first aid. Yeah. So when I think about how difficult through hikes are on our equipment, I then relate that to our bodies. And Part of it is I'm getting older. I'm in my mid 40s. Part of it is also just what you're putting your body through. But when I came back from the PCT, transitioning from hiking every day to running long distance, like half marathons and whatnot, it took my body, if I remember correctly, about 4 to 6 weeks before I could start running comfortably again. Like I remember getting back from the PCT, and like that first week I went for a run for 2 miles, and my knees and ankles and feet were like, no thanks. And then slowly over, like I said, 4 to 6 weeks, my body finally said like, okay, we can go out for a run, like longer than 2 miles. We can go train for a half marathon, whatever it was. And I distinctly remember that the year after I hiked the PCT, and so it was 2014, I set my personal record for half marathon, and I was running in Vibram Five Fingers, the barefoot shoes. When I ran 3 half marathons in Vibrams in barefoot shoes, and I almost set my PR twice, and then I finally set it. So I was running at a very fast pace. So I just remember stepping off the trail being extremely fit, and it's still taking a little bit of time for me to get into running again. After the CDT, again, I'm 9 years older, but this time around, it's taking me 3 months for me to be able to, my body to say, okay, we can run more than 2 miles now. And I've been doing it for the last 2 weeks. I've been running 5Ks every day, and walking, I think, 1.5 miles on top of that. So my body's finally in a place where it's not complaining. Like my feet, my knees, everything aren't complaining about like running. It's got itself back into shape where it's not set for just hiking. I can do other activities. And so that was one huge takeaway from this trail, was just how much longer it took for my body to make that transition of being able to hike every day. Even though I was stretching and keep myself limber during the hike, it still took 3 months for my body to kind of decompress from the hike and be able to return to running and doing other activities that, like with minimal or no pain. I'm sure if I was 9 years younger, if I'd done the CDT hike in 2013, at the time I was doing the PCT, it may not have taken 3 months, but it probably would have been longer than 4 to 6 weeks. It could have been 2 months, 2 or 2.5 months. My bottom line here is the CDT is a rough hike. You hike across desert in New Mexico. You hike across high alpine and elevation in Colorado, and it's not like you're not staying at the high elevation. You're going up and down, up and down. You get to Wyoming, and it's around July, and suddenly you're in the Great Basin, which is essentially desert weather again, because of how hot it is and how scarce water is. And then the northern part of Wyoming, you go into the winds, and you're doing high elevation up and down again, especially depending on which alternates you take. Like if you do the Cirque of the Towers or the knapsack coal, you're adding some elevation to your legs. And then you hit Idaho, and it's just nothing but straight up and down. They're not big fans of switchbacks in Idaho and Montana, so you start getting that up and down elevation, and it's not 2, 3, or 4,000 feet like Colorado, but when you're just doing this all day long, it starts wearing on you. In Colorado, you'll go up 2,000 to 3,000 feet on, most of it is on switchbacks. You get up to the top, and then you do another 2,000 to 3,000 foot descent on switchbacks, and then you walk for a bit to get your next ascent. Idaho, Montana felt like as soon as you got down, you were immediately going back up. There was no, 3 to 5 miles to your next ascent. I also think that the fact that it's a carpet of rocks up in Idaho, Montana, and a lot of the walking is not on nice dirt trails, and it's not on gentle switchbacks, except if you take the red line around Butte, because that's a lot of mountain biking trails there, so there are some switchbacks there, but I think walking on those rocks, like that carpet of rocks on the trail, also adds to the wear and tear just because it's more than high eights or low nines for Idaho, Montana. So that was one of the major takeaways I took from this trail. It's a long trail. I was trying to hike 3,000 miles. I got to 2,850-ish, just under, 49.4. I did it. I hiked it in 5 months. I was averaging 22 miles a day. And the terrain in every state's different. Like the mountains in Wyoming are different than the mountains in Colorado, which are different from the mountains in Idaho and Montana. And the Great Basin, like that flat is different than the flat in New Mexico. So that's my first takeaway. Is just this was a rugged trail. My body definitely felt it a lot more. The second takeaway I had was at some point on the trail, and this happens I think in a lot of thru hikes, I don't want to say it happens a lot. It can happen on other thru hikes. I think it definitely is going to happen at some point on the CDT for most hikers, where there's a point where you ask yourself, what is the point? I don't want to go any further. I don't want to do this anymore. That fatigue hit me in Idaho, Montana, but specifically in Montana. Like once I got past Wisdom, which was where I left Idaho for good, and I was in Montana and hiking towards grizzly bear country, the fatigue set in, and definitely I had that point of like, I don't want to be doing this anymore. However, that point of I don't want to do this anymore hit me at East Glacier, 4 days, less than 100 miles from the finish. But talking to other hikers, some of them experience it at different times. For example, there's one hiker from Denmark. I believe she was from Denmark, if I remember correctly. And she got finished with Colorado. She had hiked through New Mexico and Colorado. And she got to Wyoming and said, I'm finished. And she actually flew back to Denmark. And a few days later, she missed it and she wanted to come back. So she flew back to the States after I think being a week off trail, and she skipped forward to get back together with the group of hikers that she was with when she stepped off, and they had already finished a weekish or more in Wyoming. And because it was the Great Basin, they'd flown through that, hiked very quickly through that. And she stepped back on and she finished the trail. She got to Canada. But her point of I've had enough of this is when she finished Colorado. And Colorado is a very arduous state, especially if you're not used to elevation, you're not used to long slogs up mountain passes or over mountains themselves, because you do hit summits in Colorado where you're going up and over the top of the summits, especially the high point, which is Gray's Peak, a 14er. I think some people hit that I don't want to do this anymore when they got finished with New Mexico. They thought to themselves, man, that was hot, and then we had this, this national forest closure, and now I'm going to miss out on, for people who skipped it, I'm going to miss out on 200 to 300 miles of New Mexico. So I'm going to have this huge gap, and now I'm not in shape the way I want to be, and now I'm hitting Colorado, and I don't want to do this anymore. It was quite surprising. There were some people who they got through New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and the beginning part of Idaho, and they got to Salmon. I think it was 1 or 2 people got to Salmon, Idaho, and they said, we're done. They were not halfway through, but close to halfway through Idaho, Montana section, and they said, nope, I'm all finished with this. So most hikers, I think, are going to hit that point. And every person is going to have to determine what it is they are pursuing in order to finish. I was at peace. I was at peace walking away to East Glacier, and I ended up hiking that 100 miles to Chief Mountain, but I would have been okay walking away. And I think that's difficult to, like, when you get to your point of like, man, I've had enough of this, and if you're at peace with it, like you don't have that angst, or you don't have that sense of I wasn't tough enough, or I missed something, or I whatever it is. If you're at peace with it, stepping off is really easy. The only reason why I finished those 4 days, I don't want to say the only reason, a primary reason I finished those 4 days is because Glacier, I had had Glacier in my mind since the beginning, and I had never been to that national park, and I've heard wonderful things, and I wanted to see that national park. And I said, I'm right outside the doorstep in the national park. Just go finish the 4 days, see the national park that you want to see, and then next summer you can come back and you can hike out to the other terminus where you wanted to go. And you can explore a different part of the park, and you can also explore it when everything's open, and you can come a little bit earlier and you know, have better luck with the weather. Although I have to say, I got really lucky with the 4 days I hiked in Glacier, especially that late in the season. But when you're hiking this trail, for those who have this experience and they say, I've had enough, I'd want to step off, the only thing that keeps you going, darn it, I keep doing that absolute thing. One of the primary things that's going to keep you going is yourself, and you have to be able to justify why you're going to keep going. Whether that's at the end of New Mexico or in East Glacier after you've already hiked 2,750 miles or whatever it is I hiked by the time I got to East Glacier. So the second takeaway was, most people are gonna, hey buddy, how are you? Most people are gonna face that moment of, I'm fatigued and I want to step off. I don't want to do this anymore. And just know that going into the hike, and be prepared to either be at peace and step off, or to make sure you're finishing for the right reasons. Because the last thing you want to do is get to northern Montana, quote unquote, real grizzly bear country, and be out there for the wrong reasons. Because if you're out there just trying to plug miles and you're not yelling or protecting yourself, or staying aware of what's around you, then you could run into a bear. The third takeaway I had for this trail. So hold on, I'm going to summarize the first two. So the fact that it's a difficult trail, like it's hard on your body and your equipment, and at some point you're going to say, I want to step off. That just explains how arduous and rough of a trail is. It's there's a reason why people call it the most difficult of the Triple Crown trails in the States. The Triple Crown, again, being Appalachian Trail, the PCT, and the CDT. The CDT is frequently described as being the most difficult of the three. And even though people have tried to create as many cutoffs and shortcuts and alternates that they can to reduce the mileage, if you finish, you're still going to go through some really, really rough hiking on your body and on your equipment and on your mind. So that kind of just wraps up those first two takeaways. The third takeaway I had was, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. I have never, like prior to this, I had not had an opportunity to hike at all in New Mexico or Idaho. I'd hiked very little in Montana, and I hiked a bit in Wyoming, but the Wyoming hiking was it was limited to Yellowstone National Park. Was I in the backcountry of Yellowstone? Yes. How many people did I see during an 8-day trek in Yellowstone? I think my friend and I saw a grand total of less than 10. I'll just call it less than 10 over 8 days. I think it's even less than that, but let's just call it 10. I'd hiked a load in Colorado. So the benefit for that is, I think Colorado is, if it's not the most difficult state, it's definitely up. It's in the top two. Some people, I believe, thought that Idaho, Montana was a little bit more difficult. Mentally, for me, Idaho, Montana was much more difficult than Colorado, but Colorado for me, physically, like the fact that you're doing so much elevation, I think that's going to be the most difficult state, in my opinion. I mean, you have to remember the Colorado Trail is 490 miles or something like that, and there's 77,000 feet of elevation gain and loss in those 490 miles. And the CDT and the Colorado Trail intersect for hundreds of those miles. So we don't hike the entire Colorado Trail, but we hike a lot of it. And so we're doing that same elevation, or not all of it, but a lot of that same elevation that the Colorado Trail has. And when we enter the state, even though we're entering it down in New Mexico at a different place, and we're exiting it up in Wyoming at a different place, like there's a lot of elevation up in, I should say down and up in those two areas. But it's absolutely gorgeous. The desert has its own beauty. Like you have a light rain, and then the prickly pear cactus has their flowers coming out, and it doesn't take much of rain for the flowers to come out. Like Colorado, just the vast open wide spaces when you're getting up to the tops of those passes, and just you can see forever. The combination in Wyoming of the Great Basin where you can see forever, but not because you're so high, it's just because everything's so flat, and then going through the winds. Like the winds reminded me of the Sangre de Cristos here in Colorado, or some of the San Juans, just very craggy mountains. And then Idaho, Montana, like one of my favorite parts of this hike was in Montana, getting up to, I think I mentioned it in the video for the summary of Idaho, Montana yesterday. You go up 2,000 feet or 2,500 feet, and then you get to just walk 6, 7, 5 miles across these plateaus, and you just get to see, forever if it's clear. I mean, we had some fire smoke on some days, so we couldn't see, but the days it was clear, it was beautiful. And because it's lower elevation than Colorado, you still have trees. And so when you're standing up at that elevation and looking over, you're looking over at peaks, like summits that have trees on them. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And there's so much water. There was so much water up in Montana. There's a lot of water in the winds and in Colorado, but everything was green. A lot of green in Montana. So that's my third takeaway. It's just how beautiful the scenery was, how beautiful the wildlife, the wildflowers, the terrain. I got to hear wolves howling in nature. I got harassed by a mountain lion one night in my tent. I saw loads of moose and elk and pronghorn and deer. I got to see chipmunks fighting over pine cones. I got to see lizards. I got to see, surprisingly, I did not see a rattlesnake, which is really surprising, but I saw a few other kind of snakes. Coyotes. I'm very surprised that I didn't see any fox, but I didn't. I got to see, it was a bobcat or a lynx in Colorado, in northern Colorado. I'm pretty sure it was a lynx. It was starting to walk across this open space and saw me and turned and ran away, and just the way it ran looked like a lynx. I can't verify that because it was so quick, but I got to see grizzly bear. Whether I wanted to or not, I got to see grizzly bear. And black bear as well. I think my final count was 10 bear, and 8 of them were black and 2 of them were grizzly. I think that was the final count. I didn't get to see the wolves, but I got to listen to them. That was a very mournful howl that they made, and that was it was beautiful, sad and beautiful at the same time. So that's the third takeaway: is just how much beauty there was. Oh man. So I think my last takeaway for the hike was every time you do a through hike, or at least for me, I have kind of a little bit of my faith in humanity restored, because you can't hike these hikes without help. If you get to a trailhead and you got to get into town, you need a ride. When you're in town, sometimes you need the kindness of people to help out. So I know I'm talking vague, so I'll talk more specifics. So when you need a ride to town and some perfect stranger picks you up and gives you a ride, doesn't harass you, doesn't charge you, doesn't hassle you, just you have a wonderful conversation for a few miles and then they drop you off. It's absolutely wonderful. When you get into town and the post office closed 5 minutes ago and the postmaster sees you running up and opens the door back up to give you your package, even though it's late on Friday and they want to go home. When you see some of the hikers that have almost no money, they're just like shoestring budgets, just trying to keep things together, and you see a stranger who talks to them at the restaurant and hears about their hike and is so moved by what they're trying to accomplish that they pay for their dinner, so that that hiker doesn't have to pay out of their own pocket for dinner. People at hotels where they don't have washer and dryer, but they say like, hey, this is when we wash the linens for the hotel. If you come, before that or after that, we'll let you do your laundry. Even though it's not open to the public and there's no laundromat in town. So just come on by and we'll take care of it. And just the people that want to stop and ask you like, hey, are you a CDT hiker? Yeah, I am. Are you hiking the whole thing? I am. Oh man, can I ask you some questions? Sure. And they're just authentically interested in your hike and about you and what you're doing, and they have no alternative motives. They just want to hear about this adventure that you're on. There are many more examples, but I think you get the gist. The trail angels and everyday people that help hikers on the trail, it's just it reminds you that politics doesn't matter. I mean, I hiked across New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana. Those states have pretty different politics depending where you are in the state. And people don't, when they walk up to you, they don't say like, hey, you need to ride into town? Okay, did you vote Democrat or Republican in the last presidential election? Like, they don't ask those questions. They just say, hey, you need a ride. Let's get you into town. Do you want a beer? I remember one trailhead where there was a group and they said, hey, we only got 4 seats in our car and it's a small car and we can't take you. And we're really sorry about that. Do you want a beer? And you're like, oh, well, the beer will make getting a ride a lot more enjoyable. But the fact that you could see in their face that they're sad that they couldn't help you more, but they're doing whatever they can. And the same thing is true for hikers, where you have a hiker who's running low on food, and you run into somebody who's out for the weekend, and the person on the weekend hike says, hey buddy, hey, I got extra food. Do you want this extra food? So you can make it your additional 13 miles into town, because I only got 2 miles down to my car, so take my extra food. And so the kindness doesn't need to happen just to me. Like, witnessing that or hearing stories about it happening to other people, it's great. It was interesting because I was in, I think it was Du Bois, Wyoming. And Marty and I had just walked into a pizza place in town to get dinner. And we got approached by a gentleman. He was not from the States, he had an accent. Unfortunately, I don't remember where he's from, but he was a PhD student here in the States. And he said, "Hey, I'm doing my doctorate and my dissertation on, I don't remember exactly what it was, but part of his dissertation was interviewing and receiving input from thru-hikers. And so he had an iPad, and he said, I'm doing a certain number of interviews at different spots on the CDT and different spots on the PCT at different times when the hikers are coming through those places. And he said, I have to interview 2 more people before I'm finished with the spot, and then I got to get over to the PCT before all the hikers get through and do an interview over there. Bruce, Ruby, it's dinner time. The dogs are restless. And so Marty and I are like, yeah, sure, we'll answer your questions for the survey so that you can finish up and get over to the PCT. And that wasn't an act of kindness. Like I was mentioning my renewed faith in humanity because of the trail and the trail angels and the people that help. But it was great to hear that more people are taking interest in thru-hiking and thru-hiking culture and what thru-hikers see like on the trail. What motivates the thru-hikers? Their experiences while they're thru-hiking, what it takes to thru-hike. And it's not just people who are interested. I can't tell you how many people asked me questions when I was in town or on trail and I encountered somebody and they had no interest in thru-hiking, but they're still interested in hearing about my story and what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and how I'm doing it. And whether that is questions about how many miles I'm doing and how much elevation I'm doing in Colorado, or questions about how on earth or why on earth are you hiking through grizzly bear country on your own? Like, this is dangerous. What are you doing? Like, showing genuine concern. So I absolutely love thru-hiking. The takeaways are a mix of reminding or remembering how difficult and arduous the journey is on equipment and ourselves, how trying it is on our motivations and our mental states, how beautiful the scenery and the wildlife and the terrain is, and how awesome people are when they're helping, when they decide to help you out on the trail. Because there's a lot of people who ignore you and don't help you, but there's just as many who decide to help people achieve their goal of walking from Mexico to Canada across 5 states for no other reason, just to experience it. My final thought is actually on storytelling. I had a problem. I don't know if I still do. I'm trying to work through it. But I had a problem with people who thru-hike just to write books or just to have YouTube channels or to have blogs back in the day. Basically, the thru-hiking for notoriety I had issues with. And it wasn't so much because they're pursuing money or pursuing recognition for an accomplishment, or even trying to become famous or get sponsorships or whatever it was. I think my problem was how can you explain something that's unexplainable? I mean, you can talk about the miles you hike per day. You can talk about the equipment you're carrying. You can talk about your experiences. You can talk about the terrain that you have to face on a daily basis. You can talk about the weather. You can talk about all sorts of aspects of this hike. But how do you explain placing footsteps from Mexico to Canada or wherever your hike is going? How do you explain to someone, I want a continuous line of footsteps to show that I can achieve this goal that I've set before me, and I have no idea why I want this goal? Let me rephrase that. I understand why I want this goal. I can't explain it to you. It doesn't matter what explanation I give you, you're not going to understand it if you just don't get it. And so I was asked why I didn't monetize my YouTube channel. Why is this just for family and friends? And I think the short answer is I think that people are coming to YouTube channels for entertainment, but that entertainment has to have a purpose. And trying to explain the purpose of a thru hike is impossible because every person hikes for a different reason. Now, are there going to be some overlaps? Yeah, but the personal reason why everyone hikes, like every individual hikes, trying for them to explain that to people is unexplainable. Because again, if you don't get it, you just don't get it. And so when I read books about people thru hiking, or I see other YouTube channels or blogs or people that are writing for magazines or getting interviewed on radios or like TV programs, maybe I just don't understand what their motivation is for doing so. Or maybe some of those people can't explain it. They can explain it because they don't understand it. And I know that sounds like I'm talking in circles. But what I mean is, what if those people stepped on the trail for the distinct purpose of getting notoriety, and they don't understand why they're doing it except to get notoriety? And they missed the reason of what motivates everyone else to do this, the people who are not seeking notoriety for it. That itch, the itch on your feet or in your body. As I said in the video yesterday, my hiker fatigue 2 weeks after stepping off the trail was gone. I had the itch back. I wanted to go do another trail. How do you explain that? I don't know. So I said that I had a problem with those people. I'm trying to work through it and let them do whatever they're going to do because it's their hike and they have to hike their hike, and it's their life and they have to live their life, and they're living and hiking by their own set of guidelines, which are different than mine and different than a lot of people. I remember when I was getting ready to hike the Colorado Trail, and I went into REI. Was it the Colorado Trail or the PCT? It was one of those two, but I went into REI to get a rope to hang food. And there was a gentleman who was working at REI, the Denver flagship, who was a Triple Crowner. And the person who was getting my ropes, or was about to get my ropes, like, hey, why don't I grab him and you can ask him questions about your hikes? And the gentleman went and got the triple crowner, and the triple crowner cut my rope, and he and I were talking about like the through hiking and prepping and gear and everything else. And he said, you're gonna make it. And I said, what do you mean by that? He goes, you're gonna finish your trail. And I said, well, you know, injuries or whatever. And he goes, I've hiked a long time, many years, including like other hikes beyond the Triple Crown. And when you look and talk to a person, you can tell if they're going to make it or not. And he said, you're going to make it. And I said, well, only a third of people who start make it. And he said, you're going to make it. And I didn't quite understand what he meant. And after hiking the Colorado Trail and then the PCT and now the CDT, I kind of understand what he means by you can identify the people who are going to make it or not. I can't explain it, just like I can't explain why you hike, or I hike, or anyone hikes. Why do people ascend the 8,000 meter peaks? Why do people do what they do? But it's interesting now that I've done three long distance hikes. When you talk to people on the trail, or you run into someone who says, oh, well, I hiked, you know, I thru hiked, blah, blah, and you talk to them when you're not on trail, just in town. I don't know what it is, but when you hike, when you talk with them, you get this feeling of if they're out there for reasons that align with your own, or reasons that align with the purpose of the thru hike. And again, that makes no sense, and I don't know how to explain it. But I can say that when you're talking to someone who's full of BS, you can tell pretty quickly they're full of BS. And I can't explain that either. So I guess these closing remarks, I had the 4 takeaways from the trail, and these closing remarks over the last, 8 or 10 minutes have been essentially this. Anybody who's watched the videos of the hike and these closing videos, you're probably going to have questions. And some of those questions may revolve around why. Why did you do these hikes? Why do you want to do more hikes? And I don't quite understand this aspect, or I don't understand what you said when you said this in this video, or I don't understand your reasons. Like, you got to East Glacier and you were at peace of stepping off. Like, how is that possible? And there's going to be many other questions that I can't fathom that you may have. And I may not have the answers for them, or I may not have answers that are coherent or that answer your questions. But I know this: if you decide to go for a thru hike, whether it's 200 miles, 500 miles, 1,500 miles, 2,500 miles, 3,000 miles, whatever it is, 7,000 miles in the Great Western Loop, it's going to change your life. Hopefully for the better. Hopefully there's no lasting injuries, whether those are physical or psychological or whatever it may be. But when you're out hiking in the middle of nowhere, days away from the closest trailhead, you're carrying your food and your shelter and your water on your back, and you don't have any cell reception, and the only connection that you have is your satellite emergency beacon in case some bad stuff happens. And you're out there unplugged, carrying everything you need on your back, or most of what you need on your back. you're doing it for multiple days or multiple weeks or multiple months, it changes you. So in closing, even though I've done a hike on the Colorado Trail and I've done a hike on the PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail, my hike on the Continental Divide Trail, the CDT, changed me again. And we'll see if it's for the betterment of my life or maybe maybe I pause life for a couple years and I go hike some more. We'll see. But if you decide to adventure on the CDT, know that it is a rough trail. Know that there's at a certain point you're going to ask yourself or want to say to yourself, okay, I've had enough. You're going to see some beautiful scenery. You're going to be helped by some amazing people. And you're going to be changed by the experience. Thank you to everyone who followed along with these videos during my hike this summer. Sorry that the last 3 videos took a while to get out, and I don't know how many people are actually going to come back and see them, but I appreciate y'all being with me during the hike. I know this last video is a long video, and I appreciate you suffering through it. If you have any questions about through hiking or my experience, then email or text me, and I'll answer the questions you have. I just don't know if I have the answers or if they're answers that you want to hear, but I'll do my best. Have a nice evening. I hope everyone has a happy and healthy 2023, and I'm sure I'll talk to a lot of you soon. Bye.